So welcome everyone to Now Behind the Theme. Today we'll be talking about Hammer the Scots again with focus on the road to kingship for Robert the Bruce. So let's get into it. Now, last we left off, John Balliol had just become King of Scotland. And of course, to do that, he had to pay homage to the English king, who literally made him King of Scotland. And of course, that came with a price. And that price came when Edward I went to war with France again and called upon John Balliol to provide troops to the English army. It's at this point that John Balliol refused and, with support from the Commons and such, decided to make it worse by signing a treaty of friendship with France, which coincided with a Welsh uprising. Now, this all sounds good till you find out the situation on the ground. The first thing is, of course, that Scotland was not united. A lot of the lords had lands in England, which actually were more profitable than their lands in Scotland. One of these people are the Bruces, who actually, of course, fought with the English during this war of John Balliol's. Obviously, seeing that they had no future with John Balliol as king, meaning because they could not be king, and of course that the land they had in England earned them more money. And to show how important lands were in the game of Hammer the Scots, this actually is shown in a simple way, by which if you hold someone's land in the game at winter, the next turn, they turn to your side. Now, of course, this doesn't represent the situation of having more lands in England and such. To keep it simple, abstracted some of the details, but it makes you feel that how important land, money, and title was to these nobles, by which if you hold their land, they're more than willing to turn and switch alliances. Now, the first fight of the war was in Carlisle, with the Commons versus the Bruces. Now, it's at this point that I also found out how ineffective the Scottish army was compared to the English army. And that is because the Scottish army had about 3 generations of no real experience in mass warfare. Unlike the English, who have been fighting for as long as many of the people alive could remember. So to summarize, basically, the Scots were an army of amateurs versus the English were an army of veterans. So with that as the second point to why the situation on the ground was bad for the Scots, the third one was a major blow, in that the French did not keep to their promise to attack from the south, meaning that Edward had free rein to take his army north. He went to Berwick, of which he asked for the surrender, but of which they refused, of course. Also taking on the pretense that English merchants had been killed in Berwick, he took the place by siege in a very short time and allowed the pillage for days. And so the legend goes that he only stopped the pillage, the raping, and the killing when he saw one of his men disembowel a pregnant lady. Now again, how true this is, we do not know. And Berwick will of course be used for generations, even up to this day, on English transgressions, on Scottish liberty, and so on. So it had far-reaching consequences. Now in 4 months, John Balliol was defeated. The Scottish army was defeated, and again, if you go in-game, you actually can see this if you ever fight with Scottish troops versus the English troops, because the Scottish troops' blocks in the game are actually a lot weaker in terms of fighting ability than the English ones. So you can imagine, like, if you are playing the Scottish player, you do get a feel of how John Balliol must have felt with battle always coming out at a loss for you, and that a head-on fight with English was never a good idea to win independence. Now, with this, of course, there came the consequences of betraying the homage of Edward I, and this came in how John Balliol got his nickname, which was Tomb to Bard, which literally translates to empty coat, and that is because he was made to come before Edward I, and his coat of arms, his emblems of Scotland were all torn off him, and he was exiled to the Tower of London. Now, Edward did not just leave Scotland in that fashion and by crowning a new king of Scotland. He also by taking the stone of Scone, or the Destiny Stone, which all Scottish kings have been crowned upon. And on actually interesting note, he actually took it back to England and actually built a throne over it, so that it would mean that every time an English king sat down, he was actually dominating literally over Scotland. And of course, with that fact, you can also guess that he had made Scotland a part of England, just like how Wales had become a part of England, putting it under administrative rule of the English. And after settling things and getting homage from the nobles of Scotland and so on to the English kingship, he marches himself back to England, and he is said to have said, "A man does good business to rid himself of a turd," referring of course to John Balliol and Scotland. Now the Bruces thought, and of course fairly, that if John Balliol was defeated, they would be crowned king because they had supported English, and to be honest, it was very logical. But of course now they felt extremely slighted that they were not given the kingship, and on top of that, not only had they lost all chances to become king of Scotland now because there were no more kings of Scotland, it's at this point that Wallace turns up, and the Lord of Annandale, and he had become the Lord of the Bruces by this time, Robert, decided to join William Wallace and his uprising against the English, this time turning to Scottish patriotism, but to be honest, in my view, turning to whichever the wind blows so that he can achieve his goal, which was his own goal of him becoming king. But of course this had huge consequences because Edward I, of course, did not take lightly to this, and all the gains that Robert the Bruce had gotten from Edward I for joining the English side on John Balliol's war was removed. And of course, as we all know from my series on William Wallace, Robert the Bruce abandons him basically. And again, you might think he abandoned him out of practical reasons, but there was also selfish reasons. The price for Robert the Bruce to defect and abandon Wallace was that he got his wife, Elizabeth de Burgh. So now, as you can see, he has now turned again back to the English side. And next time we'll continue on the story of Robert the Bruce, a person who truly epitomizes the idea of political flip-flop. So comment, subscribe, let me know what you think. Thank you very much. Till next word.